April 1944, the spring of liberation. Soviet troops relentlessly advance westward, expelling the Nazis from their native land. At the forefront of this offensive is the First Ukrainian Front, commanded by Army General Nikolai Vatutin. A brilliant strategist, a master of maneuver, a man whose name is already etched in golden letters into the history of the war. Stalingrad, Kursk, the forcing of the Dnieper, the liberation of Kyiv. Behind each of these victories stands his military genius. At 43 years old, at the pinnacle of glory, at the peak of his commandership, it seemed that new victories lay ahead. Berlin, the triumphant conclusion of the war. But fate had other plans. On February 29, 1944, the commander's motorcade fell into an ambush of Ukrainian nationalists near the village of Milyatin in Rivne Oblast. Severely wounded, Vatutin fought for his life for 45 days in a Kyiv hospital. On April 15th, his heart stopped. The star of the commander faded when only a year remained until victory. In the small village of Chepukino, Voronezh Governorate, lost among endless fields, on December 12, 1891, a boy was born into the peasant family of Fyodor Grigorievich and Vera Efimovna Vatutin. They named him Nikolai. No one at that time could have imagined that this child was destined to become one of the greatest military commanders of his time. Kolya Vatutin's childhood differed little from the childhood of millions of other peasant children in Tsarist Russia. From an early age, hard work in the fields, helping his parents with household chores, struggling with constant poverty. The family lived in poverty, like most peasants of that time. There were 7 children in the Vatutin household, and every pair of working hands counted. But even then, traits that would later make him an outstanding military leader began to show in the boy. Perseverance, determination, a thirst for knowledge. Villagers recalled that little Kolya had an extraordinary craving for learning. He was one of the best students at the parochial school, which he graduated from with a certificate of commendation. However, his education could have ended there. It was rare for a peasant's son to continue his studies, but Nikolai showed character. He convinced his parents to allow him to enter the Zemstvo school in the neighboring village of Valuiki, which he brilliantly graduated from in 1909. Then, driven by a desire for knowledge, the young man entered a commercial school in the city of Orizovo. Here another talent of the future commander became apparent: mathematical ability. Teachers noted his amazing memory, analytical mind, and ability to find unconventional solutions to complex problems. These qualities would later play a decisive role in his military career. The Revolution of 1917 and the subsequent Civil War dramatically changed the fate of young Vatutin. In April 1920, he voluntarily joined the ranks of the Workers' and Peasants' Red Army. He began his service as a private soldier, but soon the command noticed his extraordinary abilities. Within a few months, Nikolai was sent to the Poltava infantry courses, where he received his first military education. Vatutin gained his first combat experience in battles with Nestor Makhno's detachments in southern Ukraine. Here, his coolness in critical situations, ability to quickly make decisions, and lead people became evident. For his displayed courage, the young commander was awarded his first award, the Order of the Red Banner. The difficult years of the Civil War hardened Vatutin's character, taught him to value human lives and understand the true price of victory. He carried these lessons throughout his military career. In subsequent years, Nikolai Fyodorovich never threw soldiers into senseless attacks, always carefully planned operations, striving to minimize losses. After the end of the Civil War, new prospects opened up for the young commander. In 1922, he entered the Kyiv Higher Combined Military School, which he graduated from with honors. This was followed by service in the staff of a rifle division, where Vatutin proved himself to be a talented staff officer and analyst. The peaceful years between the wars became a time of intense study and professional development for Nikolai Vatutin. The young officer, who had been through the crucible of the Civil War, understood that to become a true military professional, he needed to constantly improve his knowledge and skills. His natural thirst for learning, evident since childhood, now found a new direction: military science. In 1924, Vatutin entered the Frunze Military Academy, the forge of the Red Army's command personnel. Here, his analytical talent fully unfolded. Instructors noted the cadet's exceptional ability for strategic thinking, his skill in seeing the overall picture of a battle, and his capacity to predict the development of a situation several steps ahead. Fellow students recalled that Nikolai Fedorovich would spend hours poring over maps, analyzing past battles, and studying the experience of great commanders. He was particularly interested in maneuver operations, envelopments, and flanking movements, and swift breakthroughs into the enemy's rear. All that would later become General Vatutin's signature style during the Great Patriotic War. He graduated from the academy with honors in 1929. His diploma thesis, dedicated to issues of troop command in complex conditions, received the highest evaluation from the examination committee and was recommended for publication in military journals. After the academy, Vatutin was appointed Chief of Staff of a rifle division. Here, another facet of his talent emerged: his organizational abilities. He knew how to establish clear staff operations, achieve coordination among all units, and create an atmosphere of creative exploration among his subordinates. Colleagues noted Vatutin's astonishing work ethic. He could work for days, forgetting about food and rest, if the situation demanded it. Yet, he never lost his composure, remaining calm and judicious, even in the most difficult situations. In the 1930s, Vatutin's career rapidly advanced. He successively held the positions of Chief of the Operational Department of the Kyiv Military District Headquarters, Chief of Staff of a Corps, and Deputy Chief of Staff of the North Caucasian Military District. In each post, he proved himself to be a talented military professional, a thoughtful analyst, and a skilled organizer. In 1936, Nikolai Fedorovich entered the General Staff Academy, the country's highest military educational institution. Only the chosen, the most promising commanders who were destined to occupy the highest command positions in the army in the future studied here. Vatutin again displayed brilliant abilities. His diploma thesis, dedicated to deep operations involving tank formations, became a true breakthrough in the military theory of that time. Many ideas expressed by Vatutin then found practical application during the Great Patriotic War. After graduating from the academy in 1937, Vatutin was appointed Chief of Staff of the Kyiv Special Military District, one of the key districts in the country's defense system. In this position, he proved himself to be a talented organizer of large-scale exercises, during which new methods of warfare were practiced. It was during these years that Vatutin's main characteristics as a military leader were formed: a desire for unconventional solutions, the ability to think broadly, to see prospects, and a readiness to take responsibility for decisions made. These qualities would fully reveal themselves during the Great Patriotic War, when Vatutin would join the ranks of the outstanding commanders of his time. In January 1941, Nikolai Fedorovich Vatutin was appointed Deputy Chief of the General Staff of the Red Army. This was a recognition of his outstanding abilities as a military strategist and analyst. Now he was to work at the very heart of the Soviet Union's military machine, participating in the development of the country's defense plans in the face of the growing threat from Nazi Germany. Vatutin's arrival at the General Staff coincided with a period of tense international relations. World War II was already raging in Europe. Hitler's troops, having conquered most of the continent, stood at the borders of the Soviet Union. Despite the non-aggression pact signed between the USSR and Germany in 1939, many military analysts, including Vatutin, understood that a clash was inevitable. In his new position, Nikolai Fedorovich proved himself to be a far-sighted strategist. He was one of the first to grasp the scale of the German threat and the need for urgent strengthening of the country's western borders. Under his leadership, a number of analytical documents were developed, warning of the possibility of a sudden German attack and the need to bring troops to combat readiness. Vatutin personally participated in the development of the plan for the strategic deployment of troops in the western direction. He insisted on creating a deeply echeloned defense, strengthening border areas, and reinforcing anti-tank capabilities. He paid special attention to the issues of interaction between various branches of service, the organization of reliable communication and intelligence. However, not all of his proposals found support from the country's top leadership. Stalin, fearing to provoke Hitler, did not authorize full-scale measures to bring troops to combat readiness. Many intelligence warnings about Germany's impending attack were ignored or dismissed as provocations. In these difficult circumstances, Vatutin did everything possible to prepare the army for the coming trials. He initiated command and staff exercises, during which troops' actions in the event of a sudden enemy attack were practiced. Under his leadership, the plan for covering the state border was improved, and options for action in case of a breakthrough by large mechanized enemy formations were developed. Nikolai Fyodorovich paid special attention to studying the experience of the first years of World War II. He thoroughly analyzed the tactics and strategy of German troops in Poland, France, and the Balkans. This allowed him to anticipate many aspects of the future blitzkrieg against the USSR. In May-June 1941, when signs of the impending attack became obvious, Vatutin was among those who insisted on bringing the border districts to full combat readiness. He understood that the first strike would be terrible, and he sought to minimize its consequences. On the night of June 22nd, when the first reports of German troops violating the border arrived, Vatutin was in the General Staff building. It was he who gave the first orders to organize resistance to the aggressor, tried to establish communication with the border districts, and collected and analyzed incoming information. The Great Patriotic War began, which would become the main test in the life of Nikolai Fyodorovich Vatutin, a test of all his knowledge, skills, and human qualities. Ahead of him lay the most severe trials, the bitterness of defeats and the joy of victories, the rapid rise of a military commander's career, and a tragic end. June 22nd, 1941, forever changed the fate of the country and millions of its citizens. For Nikolai Fyodorovich Vatutin, this day marked the beginning of the most severe trial in his military career. When, in the pre-dawn hours, the first reports of massive bombardments of Soviet cities and the crossing of the German troops over the border reached Moscow, Vatutin was in the General Staff building. As Deputy Chief of the General Staff, he was among the first to grasp the scale of the catastrophe unfolding on the western borders of the motherland. In those initial, most difficult days of the war, when communication with the border districts was often interrupted, and information about what was happening arrived in fragments and contradictorily, it was Vatutin who maintained remarkable composure. He methodically collected data, analyzed the situation, prepared reports for the Stavka, and drafts of directives for the troops. His analytical mind, his ability to work under colossal tension and time constraints proved invaluable. In late June, when it became clear that the German offensive was developing rapidly and Soviet troops were retreating with heavy losses, Vatutin was dispatched to the Northwestern Front as Chief of Staff. Here, he was tasked with organizing the defense in one of the strategically important directions, the Leningrad one. Upon arriving at the front, Nikolai Fyodorovich encountered the chaos of the retreat. Many units were shattered, command was disrupted, and communication worked intermittently. In this critical situation, Vatutin's best qualities as a military leader became apparent. He immediately set about restoring the troop control system, established intelligence work, and organized the collection and analysis of information about the enemy. Unlike many other commanders who were confused in the early days of the war, Vatutin maintained clarity of thought and firmness of spirit. He understood that in the prevailing situation, the main thing was to gain time, preserve manpower and equipment, wear down the enemy in defensive battles, and then launch a counteroffensive. Under his leadership, the staff of the Northwestern Front developed a defense plan on the Luga River line. This plan envisaged the creation of fortified areas, the organization of a fire system, and engineering equipment of the terrain. Special attention was paid to anti-tank defense, as tank wedges were the main striking force of the Wehrmacht. In July-August 1941, the troops of the Northwestern Front, under the command of General Fyodor Kuznetsov and Chief of Staff Nikolai Vatutin, waged heavy defensive battles on the approaches to Leningrad. Despite the enemy's superiority in forces and means, the Soviet troops managed to slow down the German advance, inflict significant losses on them, and gain precious time to strengthen the city's defense. In these battles, Vatutin's particular style of work as a staff officer became evident. He did not limit himself to office work, but often went to the front line, personally studied the situation, and conversed with commanders and soldiers. This allowed him to have an objective picture of what was happening and to make informed decisions. Colleagues noted Nikolai Fyodorovich's astonishing capacity for work. In those days, he slept 2 to 3 hours a day, dedicating all other time to work. At the same time, he never lost his composure, was collected, clear in his formulations, and demanding of himself and his subordinates. In the autumn of 1941, when German troops approached Leningrad closely and the city's blockade began, Vatutin was recalled to Moscow. His experience and talents were needed to organize the defense of the capital, which was also under mortal threat. The first months of the war became a harsh school for all Soviet military leaders. Many of them paid for the lessons of this school with their lives or careers. Vatutin, however, managed not only to survive in this crucible, but also to gain invaluable experience, which would soon allow him to become one of the most successful commanders of the Great Patriotic War. The summer of 1942 was a difficult one for the Soviet Union. After the relative successes of the winter counteroffensive near Moscow, a period of new trials began. The German command regrouped its forces and launched a powerful strike in the southern direction. Soviet troops retreated towards the Volga and the foothills of the Caucasus. At this critical moment, on July 12th, Nikolai Fedorovich Vatutin received an appointment that became a turning point in his military career. Commander of the Voronezh Front. This was Vatutin's first independent front command. Before this, he had proven himself to be a brilliant staff officer, a talented deputy commander. But now the full responsibility for a huge military formation rested on his shoulders. The situation on the front was extremely difficult. German troops and their allies had broken through the defenses at the junction of the Bryansk and southwestern fronts and were rapidly advancing towards the Don and Voronezh. Upon arriving at the command post, Vatutin immediately assessed the criticality of the situation. The enemy outnumbered Soviet troops in both manpower and equipment. The situation with tank formations was particularly dangerous. The Germans had almost twice as many. The city of Voronezh was already partially captured by the enemy, and fierce street battles were underway. Vatutin acted decisively and unconventionally. Instead of throwing all his forces at holding the city at any cost, he organized a strong defense on the eastern bank of the Don, simultaneously leaving separate units in Voronezh that tied down significant enemy forces. Many considered this decision controversial, but time showed its strategic wisdom. Nikolai Fyodorovich personally visited the front lines, assessed the situation, and spoke with commanders and soldiers. One officer recalled, "Vatutin appeared where it was especially difficult. He didn't raise his voice, spoke calmly, but every word of his instilled confidence." After such meetings, people were ready to fight to the last. The commander paid special attention to intelligence. He demanded accurate and timely data on the enemy, understanding that in mobile warfare, information often decides the outcome of a battle. By his order, special reconnaissance groups were created that operated behind enemy lines and provided valuable information about the movements and plans of German troops. Despite the most difficult situation, Vatutin was not limited to defense. Already at the end of July, he organized several counterattacks, which, although they did not lead to large territorial gains, forced the German command to revise their plans and transfer part of their forces from the southern direction, where their main offensive on Stalingrad was developing. In August-September, the troops of the Voronezh front under Vatutin's command waged stubborn local battles, exhausting the enemy, accumulating strength and experience. Nikolai Fyodorovich carefully analyzed each operation, learned from failures, and encouraged the initiative of commanders. Gradually, the front stabilized. In October, the Stavka of the Supreme High Command began planning a grand counteroffensive near Stalingrad. The Voronezh front was assigned an important role in this operation: to tie down enemy forces, preventing them from transferring reserves to Stalingrad. Vatutin brilliantly coped with this task. Moreover, he proposed a number of his own initiatives, which were included in the overall plan of the counteroffensive. In November 1942, Nikolai Fyodorovich was transferred to the post of commander of the Southwestern Front, which was to play a key role in the encirclement of the enemy's Stalingrad grouping. But the experience he gained on the Voronezh front proved invaluable. It was here, in the battles of the summer and autumn of 1942, that Vatutin's military leadership style finally took shape. Boldness of strategic thought, unconventional decisions, the ability to maneuver, special attention to reconnaissance, and meticulous planning of operations. All these qualities would soon allow him to become one of the most successful Soviet military leaders of the Great Patriotic War. November 1942. Stalingrad was bleeding, but it did not surrender. For the fourth month, the battle raged, destined to become a turning point in the entire Great Patriotic War. German troops, having broken through to the Volga, became bogged down in fierce street fighting. Soviet command prepared a powerful counterblow, intended to encircle and destroy the enemy grouping. A key role in this operation was assigned to the Southwestern Front, whose commander was appointed Nikolai Fyodorovich Vatutin. Upon arriving at his new post, Vatutin plunged headlong into the preparation of the offensive. The operation was codenamed Uranus. Its concept was daring and large-scale, to deliver powerful blows to the flanks of the German grouping, break through the defenses, and close the encirclement around Paulus's Sixth Army. Vatutin personally participated in the development of the operation plan, making valuable suggestions and adjustments. He insisted on the creation of powerful strike groupings, saturated with tanks and artillery, capable of quickly breaking through enemy defenses and developing success in depth. Special attention was paid to issues of interaction between various branches of service and neighboring fronts. Preparation was carried out under conditions of strict secrecy. The regrouping of troops, the pulling up of reserves, the accumulation of ammunition, all this took place predominantly at night. During the day, normal activity was maintained so as not to arouse the enemy's suspicions. Reconnaissance worked with redoubled energy, collecting data on the disposition of enemy units, the defense system, and the availability of reserves. Nikolai Fyodorovich understood. The success of the operation largely depended on surprise. The Germans had to remain unaware of the scale of the impending blow until the last moment, and this task was brilliantly solved. The German command, focusing its attention on the battles in Stalingrad itself, underestimated the threat on the flanks. On November 19, 1942, the roar of artillery preparation broke out. The troops of the Southwestern Front under Vatutin's command went on the offensive. The blow was crushing. On the very first day, Soviet units broke through the enemy's defenses on a 22-kilometer sector and advanced up to 35 kilometers deep. Romanian troops, covering the flanks of the German grouping, could not withstand the onslaught and fled. Vatutin personally commanded the operation from the forward command post. He closely monitored the development of the offensive, promptly reacted to changes in the situation, and transferred reserves to the directions of the main blows. His military talent was fully revealed. He felt the battlefield, anticipated enemy actions, and made bold and unconventional decisions. Vatutin's ability for maneuver warfare was particularly evident. He did not seek to gnaw through enemy defenses with frontal assaults, but looked for weak spots, bypassed centers of resistance, broke into operational space, and struck at enemy communications and rear. Tank and mechanized corps rapidly advanced, not giving the enemy time to recover and organize new defense lines. On November 23, advanced units of the Southwestern Front linked up with troops of the Stalingrad Front in the Kalach area. The encirclement ring closed. 22 enemy divisions, totaling about 300,000 men, were trapped in the cauldron. This was the largest victory of Soviet troops since the beginning of the war, and Vatutin's contribution to it is hard to overestimate. But the operation did not end there. It was necessary to create a strong outer encirclement front to repel attempts at deblockade from outside. And here, Vatutin again proved himself a master of defensive battles. Under his leadership, a deeply echeloned defense system was created, saturated with anti-tank artillery and engineering obstacles. In December, the German command made a desperate attempt to break the encirclement and save Paulus's army. Army Group Dawn, under the command of Field Marshal Manstein, launched a powerful blow from the southwest. But Vatutin's troops met the enemy fully armed. During fierce battles, the German offensive was stopped and then repelled. The encircled grouping was doomed. The Stalingrad victory became Vatutin's finest hour as a commander. Here, his military talent, ability to think strategically, make bold decisions, and ensure their execution were fully revealed. For the successful conduct of Operation Uranus, Nikolai Fyodorovich was awarded the Order of Suvorov First Class and received the rank of Army General. Stalingrad became a turning point not only in Vatutin's career, but also in the course of the entire war. The strategic initiative passed to the Soviet troops. New battles, new victories, and new trials lay ahead. But the lessons of Stalingrad, the experience of conducting large-scale offensive operations, the mastery of encircling large enemy groupings, all this Nikolai Fyodorovich would use in his future campaigns, perfecting his military art. After the brilliantly executed Stalingrad operation, Nikolai Fedorovich Vatutin was again appointed commander of the Voronezh Front in early January 1943. This return was symbolic. It was here, 6 months earlier, that he received his first independent command of a front. It was here that his command style was formed, and it was here that he first proved himself as a talented military leader. Now he was tasked with developing the success achieved at Stalingrad and liberating a significant part of Soviet territory from the German fascist invaders. The Voronezh Front occupied a strategically important position on the central sector of the Soviet-German confrontation. After the disaster at Stalingrad, the German command hastily transferred reserves to close the gap and stabilize the front. Vatutin, upon receiving the new appointment, immediately began preparing for Operation Zvezda, the goal of which was to liberate Kharkov and reach the Dnieper River. When planning the operation, Nikolai Fyodorovich fully utilized the experience gained at Stalingrad. He created powerful strike groups in the directions of the main attacks, meticulously organized cooperation between infantry, tanks, and artillery, and paid special attention to reconnaissance and camouflage. A characteristic feature of his command style was the desire for maneuver, bypassing fortified enemy strongholds and breaking out into operational space. On January 24, 1943, the troops of the Voronezh Front launched an offensive. The blow was unexpected for the enemy and extremely successful. Having broken through the German defenses, Soviet tank and mechanized formations rushed forward. In 2 weeks of the offensive, They advanced 100 to 120 kilometers, liberated hundreds of settlements, including the major cities of Kursk, Belgorod, and Kharkov. Vatutin personally directed the operation, often traveling to the front line, meeting with commanders, and promptly responding to changes in the situation. His energy, determination, and ability to make quick decisions inspired the troops. One of the staff officers recalled, "Nikolai Fedorovich was tireless in those days. It seemed he needed neither rest nor sleep. His presence at the command post or on the front line had an encouraging effect on everyone." However, the rapid offensive also had a downside. The troops stretched out, the flanks became exposed, and the rear lagged behind. The German command, having recovered from the initial shock, transferred fresh SS tank divisions to the Kharkov area. In mid-February, they launched a powerful counterattack against the stretched communications of the Soviet troops. Vatutin found himself in an extremely difficult situation. The forces were unequal, ammunition and fuel were running out, and there were not enough reserves. A difficult decision had to be made to retreat. On March 16th, Kharkov was again abandoned by Soviet troops. This was a bitter lesson for Vatutin, a lesson he learned and never repeated such mistakes again. After the retreat from Kharkov, Vatutin managed to stabilize the front along the Seversky Donets River. A short operational pause ensued, which both sides used to prepare for the decisive battles of the summer of 1943. Soviet intelligence recorded a massive concentration of German troops in the Kursk salient area. It became clear that the enemy was preparing a major offensive. Vatutin, relying on intelligence data and his own analysis, concluded that the main German blow would be delivered precisely in the Voronezh front sector. He reported his considerations to the Stavka and proposed not just to defend, but to create a deeply echeloned defense, exhaust the enemy, and then launch a counteroffensive. This plan was approved by the Supreme High Command. In April-June 1943, under Vatutin's leadership, a grandiose effort was launched on the Voronezh front to prepare for repelling the German offensive. Defensive lines, minefields, and anti-tank areas were created. Special attention was paid to anti-tank artillery, the main means of combating German tanks. At the same time, reserves for a counterattack were accumulated. Vatutin personally controlled the progress of the work, made adjustments, and demanded maximum effort from his subordinates. He understood the upcoming battle could be decisive in the entire war, and for this test, it was necessary to prepare more thoroughly than ever, taking into account all the lessons of past battles, including the bitter experience of the Kharkov retreat. On July 5, 1943, the dawn over the Kursk Bulge was illuminated by the flashes of thousands of guns. One of the largest battles of World War II began, a battle that definitively buried the German blitzkrieg strategy and transformed Nikolai Vatutin into a commander of the highest rank. Operation Citadel, the Wehrmacht's last attempt to turn the tide of the war, encountered an insurmountable obstacle, created in part by Vatutin's genius. On the southern face of the Kursk salient, a German force commanded by Field Marshal Manstein launched an attack on the positions of the Voronezh front. 4 tank divisions, including the elite SS units Totenkopf, Das Reich, and Adolf Hitler, supported by infantry and air power, moved to attack. But Vatutin was ready. Months of preparation had not been in vain. The Germans were met with a deeply echeloned defense, consisting of 8 lines with a total depth of up to 300 kilometers. A distinctive feature of the defense, created according to Vatutin's plan, was an unprecedented saturation with anti-tank weapons. Up to 2,500 mines were laid, and up to 70 anti-tank guns were concentrated on each kilometer of the front. Nikolai Fedorovich personally supervised the creation of anti-tank strongholds, understanding that German Tigers and Panthers posed the main threat. In the first days of the battle, the Germans managed to penetrate the Soviet defenses. The most dangerous situation developed in the Prokhorovka area, where the enemy threatened to break through the front. Vatutin made a bold decision, not to withdraw troops, but to launch a counterattack. He transferred a tank corps and a rifle division from the reserve to the threatened sector. On July 12, the largest tank battle of World War II took place in the Prokhorovka area. About 1,200 tanks and self-propelled guns from both sides clashed in a deadly struggle in a limited space. The battlefield turned into a fiery hell. Vatutin was at the command post, from where he directed the actions of the troops. He received reports on the situation every half hour. One of the staff officers recalled, "Nikolai Fyodorovich was extremely focused and calm. He gave clear orders, reallocated artillery, called for air support to threatened areas. In the most critical moments, his composure was transmitted to everyone around him." By the end of the day, the German offensive had stalled. Having lost hundreds of tanks and thousands of soldiers, the enemy switched to defense. Operation Citadel was thwarted. On July 15, Vatutin received an order from the Stavka to launch a counteroffensive. The operation was codenamed Rumyantsev. Its goal was to defeat the Belgorod-Kharkov enemy grouping and liberate Kharkov. Preparations for the offensive were carried out in the shortest possible time. Vatutin personally visited units, clarified tasks, and checked the readiness of the troops. He paid special attention to the interaction of infantry, tanks, and aviation. On August 3, the troops of the Voronezh front went on the offensive. Breaking through the enemy's defenses, they rapidly advanced. Vatutin used his favorite tactic: deep flanking attacks, followed by the encirclement of enemy groupings. Tank units, operating detached from the main forces, broke into operational space, cut enemy communications, and created panic in their rear. On August 5th, Belgorod was liberated. On the same day, Moscow, for the first time during the war, saluted the liberators. This salute was the first in a series of many with which the capital would mark the victories of Soviet troops. Vatutin did not stop there. Developing the offensive, the troops of the Voronezh front continued to push the enemy towards Kharkov. The German command hastily transferred reserves, trying to hold this important strategic point. But it was already impossible to stop Vatutin. On August 23, Kharkov was completely liberated. This was an especially sweet victory for Nikolai Fyodorovich, for it was here, 6 months earlier, that he had experienced the bitterness of defeat. Now he returned as a victor, having learned from past mistakes. The Battle of Kursk became Vatutin's finest hour. He proved himself a master of defensive battles and a talented organizer of offensive operations. For his skillful command of troops, Nikolai Fyodorovich was awarded the Order of Kutuzov First Class. His name became known throughout the country. Articles about the victories of the Voronezh front were published in newspapers, and reports of his successes were broadcast on the radio. Soldiers proudly said, "We are Vatutin's men." After the Battle of Kursk, the war definitively turned westward. The strategic initiative firmly passed to the Soviet troops. Ahead were new battles, new victories, but also new trials. Nikolai Fyodorovich Vatutin continued to command the front, leading his troops to the borders of the motherland. He did not yet know that he had only a few months of life left, that his star, which had flared so brightly in the firmament of military glory, would soon tragically be extinguished by the bullet of a Ukrainian nationalist. But that would be later. For now, in August 43, new horizons, new prospects opened before him. Ahead was the Dnieper, a mighty water barrier, the crossing of which would be the next test of Vatutin's military talent. The autumn of 1943. Soviet troops, emboldened by their victory in the Battle of Kursk, advanced relentlessly westward. Ahead lay the Dnieper, a formidable water barrier which the German command had transformed into a part of their eastern wall. Hitler declared that the Dnieper would sooner flow backward than the Russians would overcome this line of defense. Nikolai Fyodorovich Vatutin, commander of the Voronezh Front, soon to be renamed the First Ukrainian, prepared to refute this Führer's arrogant statement. Vatutin understood. Delay was akin to death. If the Germans were given time to fortify themselves on the right bank, crossing the river would result in enormous losses. Therefore, he made a daring decision to force the Dnieper on the move without waiting for heavy equipment and pontoon parks to arrive. Many considered this decision an adventure, but Nikolai Fyodorovich was convinced of its correctness. "We cannot allow the enemy to recover," he said at a meeting of army commanders. "Every day of delay means new pillboxes on the right bank, new minefields, new casualties among our soldiers." On September 22nd, the advanced units of the Voronezh Front reached the Dnieper. Scouts, using makeshift means, logs, rafts, fishing boats, crossed to the right bank and seized small bridgeheads. The main forces followed close behind. The soldiers used everything that could stay afloat: barrels, planks, bundles of brushwood. Artillerymen transported guns on makeshift rafts. Sappers built crossings under fire. Vatutin was constantly at the command posts of the armies, personally overseeing the crossing, promptly shifting reserves to sectors where success was imminent. His energy, determination, and willingness to take responsibility inspired the troops. By the end of September, the troops of the Voronezh Front managed to capture several bridgeheads on the right bank of the Dnieper, including in the area of Bukrin and Lyutezh, north of Kyiv. Now it was necessary to expand these bridgeheads, connect them, and create conditions for the liberation of the Ukrainian capital. The German command, realizing the danger, threw significant forces against the Soviet bridgeheads. Particularly fierce battles unfolded on the Bukrin bridgehead, where the enemy launched several powerful counterattacks with tanks and aviation. Vatutin initially planned to deliver the main blow from the Bukrin bridgehead, but soon realized that the terrain there was unfavorable for the operations of large tank formations. Ravines, hills, and wooded areas hindered maneuver. Then he made an unconventional decision: to secretly regroup the main forces to the Lyutezh bridgehead and strike Kyiv from there. This regrouping became a classic of military art. In the conditions of autumn mud, along washed-out roads, under constant enemy air attacks, General Rybalko's tank army made a 200-kilometer march and concentrated on the Lyutezh bridgehead. At the same time, on the Bukrin bridgehead, an imitation of an offensive preparation was created. Mock tanks moved, false radio stations operated, and demonstrative reconnaissance was carried out. The Germans fell for this trick. They continued to hold their main forces against the Bukrin bridgehead when, on November 3rd, the main blow of the Soviet troops fell from the Lyutezh bridgehead. The enemy's defenses were breached, and on November 6th, Kyiv was liberated. The liberation of the Ukrainian capital became a triumph of Vatutin's military leadership. He demonstrated the ability for strategic maneuver, the skill to mislead the enemy, and the readiness to abandon the initial plan if the situation demanded a different solution. But Nikolai Fyodorovich did not stop there. Developing the success, the troops of the First Ukrainian Front continued their offensive in right-bank Ukraine. In November-December, they liberated Zhytomyr, Korostyn, Berdychev, and other cities, advancing 100 to 150 kilometers west of Kyiv. The German command, seeking to restore the situation, launched a counterattack in the Zhytomyr area at the end of November. Vatutin, correctly assessing the situation, timely regrouped forces and stopped the enemy. Then, having accumulated reserves, he resumed the offensive at the end of December. The military art of Nikolai Fyodorovich Vatutin represents a unique blend of classical strategic principles and innovative tactical methods. His command style was forged in the crucible of the fiercest battles of the Great Patriotic War, and was characterized by a number of distinctive features that set him apart from other Soviet military leaders. First and foremost, Vatutin was a master of unconventional solutions. Unlike many commanders who preferred to act according to a template, He always sought unexpected moves capable of catching the enemy off guard. A classic example was the operation to liberate Kyiv in the autumn of 1943, when he feigned preparations for the main thrust from the Bucharin bridgehead, but actually delivered it from the Etched bridgehead, leading to the rapid liberation of the Ukrainian capital. Vatutin never did what the enemy expected of him, recalled Marshal Ivan Konyev. This ability to think outside the box made him unpredictable for German generals accustomed to certain tactical schemes. The second distinctive feature of Vatutin's command style was deep flanking attacks and encirclements. He rarely resorted to frontal assaults, preferring to find weak points in the enemy's defenses, break through the front in a narrow sector, and develop success in depth and on the flanks. Such tactics allowed for the encirclement of large enemy groupings, as happened at Stalingrad and later in the Korsun-Shevchenkivsky operation. Nikolai Fedorovich masterfully utilized tank and mechanized formations to develop tactical breakthroughs into operational success. His tank wedges rapidly cut into enemy positions, severed communications, created panic in the rear, and deprived the German command of the ability to maneuver reserves. Vatutin paid particular attention to intelligence. Without accurate data on the enemy, any operation is an adventure, he told his staff. Nikolai Fedorovich personally interrogated prisoners, thoroughly studied intelligence reports, and demanded from his subordinates the most complete information possible about the enemy's forces and intentions. Thanks to this, he often anticipated enemy actions, which provided a decisive advantage in planning operations. Another strong point of Vatutin was his ability to organize the interaction of various branches of service. In his operations, infantry, tanks, artillery, and aviation acted as a single, coordinated mechanism. He ensured that every commander clearly understood his task and place in the overall plan, and could show initiative without violating the overall design. An important feature of Vatutin's command style was flexibility. He never clung to the initial plan if the situation demanded its change. A plan is not dogma, but a guide to action, Nikolai Fyodorovich liked to repeat. This ability to quickly adapt to changing conditions was particularly evident in the Battle of Kursk, when he promptly redeployed reserves to threatened areas, adjusted tasks for troops, and changed the directions of attacks. Comparing Vatutin with other outstanding Soviet military leaders, one cannot help but notice his uniqueness. If Zhukov was distinguished by his iron will and decisiveness, Konyev by his methodicalness and thoroughness, Rokossovsky by his meticulous planning, then Vatutin stood out precisely for his unconventional thinking, his ability to find unexpected solutions in the most difficult situations. Unlike Zhukov, who often achieved victory by concentrating overwhelming forces in the direction of the main thrust, Vatutin sought to achieve success through maneuver, surprise, and bypassing fortified resistance nodes. His operations usually required fewer casualties, which was highly valued by the soldiers. Compared to Konyev, Vatutin was more inclined to risk, to bold, sometimes audacious decisions. Konyev preferred to act surely, meticulously preparing each operation, while Vatutin often relied on improvisation, on the ability to quickly react to changes in the situation. Rokossovsky and Vatutin were similar in their attention to planning details, but differed in their approaches to implementing plans. Rokossovsky sought to foresee all possible scenarios and prepare for them, while Vatutin relied on the initiative of his subordinates, on their ability to make independent decisions within the overall design. The military art of Nikolai Fyodorovich Vatutin had a significant impact on the development of Soviet military strategy and tactics. Many of his innovative techniques were adopted by other commanders, studied in military academies, and entered textbooks on military art. His operations for encircling large enemy groupings, forcing water barriers, and breaking through fortified defensive lines became classics of military affairs. By early 1944, the First Ukrainian Front, under the command of Nikolai Vatutin, continued its offensive in right-bank Ukraine. After the liberation of Kyiv and the repulsion of German counterattacks, Soviet forces gained the opportunity to capitalize on their success. The Stavka of the Supreme High Command set an ambitious task for Vatutin: to defeat Army Group South and liberate the right-bank part of Ukraine. Vatutin developed the plan for the Zhytomyr-Berdichev operation, which began on December 24th. Despite the muddy conditions and difficult weather, the front's troops broke through the enemy's defenses and surged forward. Nikolai Fyodorovich employed his favorite tactic: deep envelopments and outflanking maneuvers, which allowed him to avoid frontal clashes and save soldiers' lives. "Maneuver is the soul of modern combat," Vatutin told his commanders. "There's no need to charge headlong where you can bypass." The German command attempted to organize counterattacks, but each time Vatutin anticipated the enemy's intentions and thwarted them. By mid-January 1944, the forces of the First Ukrainian Front had advanced up to 200 kilometers, liberating Zhytomyr, Berdichev, Bila Tserkva, and hundreds of other settlements. No sooner had the Zhytomyr-Berdichev operation concluded than Vatutin began preparing for a new, even larger-scale offensive: the Korsun-Shevchenkovsky operation. Its goal was to encircle and destroy a large enemy grouping holding a salient in the Korsun-Shevchenkovsky area. The operation plan, developed by Vatutin in conjunction with Konyev, commander of the Second Ukrainian Front, envisioned converging strikes from the north and south, followed by a link-up in the Zvenigorodka area and the creation of inner and outer encirclement fronts. On January 24th, the forces of the First Ukrainian Front went on the offensive. Despite stubborn enemy resistance, Soviet tank crews and infantry broke through the defenses and surged towards Konyev's troops. On January 28th, the leading units of the two fronts linked up in the Zvenigorodka area. 10 German divisions, totaling approximately 80,000 men, found themselves in the pocket. The German command, realizing the catastrophic nature of the situation, made desperate attempts to relieve the encircled troops. From the west, SS Panzer divisions moved to aid the trapped forces. The situation became critical. There was a real threat of a breakthrough of the outer encirclement front. Vatutin personally traveled to the threatened sector to assess the situation on the ground and take necessary measures. He transferred additional anti-tank assets to the dangerous area, called in aviation, and organized a counterattack. Thanks to these measures, the attempt to relieve the encirclement was thwarted. On February 17th, the encircled grouping was completely eliminated. The Korsun-Shevchenkovsky operation, which the West called Little Stalingrad, became another triumph of Vatutin's military art. Not content with what had been achieved, Nikolai Fyodorovich immediately began preparing for a new operation: the Rovno-Lutsk operation. Its goal was the liberation of the northwestern regions of Ukraine and the creation of conditions for a subsequent offensive on Lviv. In a short period, from January 27th to February 11th, the forces of the First Ukrainian Front advanced 100 to 200 kilometers, liberated the cities of Rovno, Lutsk, Zdolbunov, and reached the approaches to Dubno. Crucial enemy communications were cut, and prerequisites for further offensive were created. Vatutin was in constant motion, moving from one command post to another, personally monitoring the course of military operations, meeting with commanders, and inspiring soldiers. His energy seemed inexhaustible. In late February 1944, the First Ukrainian Front was preparing for a new offensive, the Proskurov-Chernivtsi operation. Vatutin, as always, meticulously planned the upcoming actions, conducted reconnaissance, and held meetings with army commanders. Nothing foreshadowed the tragedy that would soon cut short the life of the outstanding military leader. February 29, 1944, the day that forever changed the course of the war for one of the most talented commanders of the Red Army. Nikolai Fyodorovich Vatutin, commander of the First Ukrainian Front, was returning from reconnaissance in the Rovno-Dubno area. The war was rolling back to the west. Soviet troops were liberating one settlement after another. It seemed that the worst was already behind them. The commander's route passed through the village of Milyatin in the Rivne region. The territory was considered liberated, but the situation behind Soviet lines remained complex. Formations of the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, UPA, fighting against both German occupiers and Soviet troops, were actively operating in the western lands of Ukraine. Vatutin traveled with a small escort, only 13 men. According to eyewitnesses, the general disliked large escorts, believing that a commander should be closer to his troops. This habit, which spoke of Nikolai Fyodorovich's personal bravery, played a tragic role on that fateful day. Around 2 in the afternoon, a convoy of 3 cars was passing through a wooded stretch of road. Suddenly, shots rang out from the roadside thickets. The cars fell into a carefully organized ambush. The attackers, a UPA detachment numbering about 30 men, opened heavy fire from submachine guns and machine guns. The commander's guards engaged in battle, trying to cover Vatutin. The general himself, according to survivors, showed composure and courage. He did not hide behind his subordinates, but participated in the firefight with everyone, using his personal weapon. During the short but fierce battle, Nikolai Fyodorovich received a severe wound to his thigh. The bullet shattered the bone and damaged an artery. Heavy bleeding began. The driver and adjutant managed to pull the wounded commander out of the line of fire and load him into the car. When reinforcements arrived, the attackers disappeared into the forest. The convoy with the wounded Vatutin headed to the nearest field hospital, where he received first aid. The general's condition was assessed as serious but not hopeless. News of the front commander's injury instantly reached Moscow. Stalin, who highly valued Vatutin's military talent, ordered the best medics to be sent to Rovno. But transporting the wounded man over frontline roads took time. Only by evening was Nikolai Fyodorovich delivered to the Rivne military hospital, where he underwent surgery. What was the situation behind Soviet lines in the liberated territories of Ukraine? By the beginning of 1944, it was extremely complex and contradictory. Along with the joy of liberation from the German occupiers, there was also a powerful nationalist underground. The Ukrainian Insurgent Army, created on the basis of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, OUN, by this time numbered tens of thousands of fighters. Its leadership proclaimed the goal of creating an independent Ukrainian state and viewed Soviet power as an occupation force, no less hostile than Nazi Germany. The UPA had particularly strong positions in the western regions of Ukraine, Volyn, Rivne, Ternopil, where nationalist sentiments were historically strong. Here, the insurgents controlled significant territories, had a developed underground network, and enjoyed the support of part of the local population. Soviet command underestimated the scale of this threat. The main attention was paid to fighting regular Wehrmacht units, and ensuring security in the rear was considered a secondary task. This led to serious miscalculations in organizing the protection of senior command staff. The routes of movement of commanders were often not kept secret, security was small, and reconnaissance of the area was carried out formally. Vatutin, like many other generals, was accustomed to the relative safety of the frontline zone and did not assume that mortal danger could lie in wait in the liberated rear. The tragedy of February 29th became a bitter lesson for the Soviet military leadership. After the attack on Vatutin, security measures were significantly strengthened. The number of guards for senior officers was increased, and the practice of thorough route checks was introduced. But for Nikolai Fyodorovich, these measures came too late. The wounding of the commander of the First Ukrainian Front had serious operational consequences. Vatutin was in the midst of preparing a new large-scale offensive operation. His experience, intuition, and authority among subordinates were indispensable. Now his deputy temporarily took command of the front, and soon a new commander arrived, Marshal Georgy Zhukov. The attack on Vatutin showed that the war in Ukraine had not only a frontline dimension. A complex conflict unfolded here, intertwining the confrontation with Nazi Germany and the struggle against the nationalist underground. This conflict continued for many years after the end of the Great Patriotic War and claimed thousands of lives. 45 days. That's how long the desperate struggle for the life of Army General Nikolai Vatutin lasted. 45 days of hopes, disappointments, temporary improvements, and new crises. 45 days during which the entire country followed reports on the health of the outstanding military leader. After the first operation in the Rivne hospital, the wounded commander was transported to Kyiv. The transportation was difficult. Every jolt on the broken roads caused Nikolai Fyodorovich suffering. In the Kyiv hospital, Vatutin was placed in a private ward under round-the-clock observation by the best doctors. In the first days, the doctors' prognoses were cautiously optimistic. The wound, though severe, did not seem fatal. The main danger was infection. The wound could not be properly treated in field conditions. Doctors fought the nascent infection with all available means. Antibiotics, which were extremely scarce then, antiseptics, blood transfusions. Stalin, upon learning of Vatutin's injury, ordered a group of the country's best doctors, led by the chief surgeon of the Red Army, Nikolai Burdenko, to be sent to Kyiv. The consultation included leading specialists in traumatology, surgery, and therapy. Rare medications and medical equipment were delivered from Moscow by plane. Daily reports on the general's health were sent to the Kremlin. Stalin personally called the doctors, demanding exhaustive information. Do everything possible and impossible to save Vatutin. Such was the directive of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. Numerous telegrams from commanders and soldiers of the First Ukrainian Front, from state leaders, and from ordinary citizens arrived at the wounded commander's ward. People expressed support, wished for a speedy recovery. Nikolai Fyodorovich, despite his grave condition, was interested in the situation at the front, asked about his troops, about the course of operations that he had begun to plan. In the first weeks after the injury, signs of improvement were observed. The temperature decreased, appetite appeared. Doctors cautiously spoke of positive dynamics. Vatutin even began to work a little, dictating letters, giving instructions, making plans for returning to duty. However, in mid-March, there was a sharp deterioration. The infection, despite all the efforts of the doctors, continued to spread. Gangrene began. Doctors decided on amputation of the leg, hoping to stop the infection. The operation was successful, but the body, weakened by the injury and infection, recovered with difficulty. At the end of March, Vatutin developed sepsis, blood poisoning. His condition became critical. The temperature rose to 40 degrees, and problems with the heart and kidneys began. Doctors fought for every hour of his life, using all available treatment methods. In early April, there was some improvement, giving a faint hope. Nikolai Fyodorovich was even able to dictate a letter to his wife and daughter, who were in evacuation. He asked them not to worry and promised to get better soon. But this improvement proved temporary. On April 15, 1944, at 15 hours and 10 minutes, the heart of Army General Nikolai Fyodorovich Vatutin stopped. He was only 43 years old. News of the military leader's death shocked the entire country. All Union mourning was declared. Obituaries signed by the highest state leadership appeared in newspapers. Radio broadcasted messages about the passing of the outstanding military commander. In the units of the First Ukrainian Front, which Vatutin formally commanded until his last day, there was deep sorrow. Soldiers and commanders lost not just a talented leader, but a man whom they sincerely respected and loved. Vatutin's body was delivered to Kyiv, to the Opera House building, where a farewell hall was arranged. Thousands of Kyiv residents came to pay their last respects to the liberator of their city. Generals and marshals, who had arrived to escort their comrade in arms on his last journey, stood in the honor guard. On April 17th, a state funeral was held. The coffin with the military leader's body was carried on an artillery carriage through the central streets of Kyiv. The procession was accompanied by an honor escort. A military band performed funeral marches. Tens of thousands of people lined the procession route to bid farewell to the general. Nikolai Vatutin was buried in the center of Kyiv, in Mariinsky Park. A farewell volley thundered over the grave. Soon, a temporary monument was erected at the burial site. And after the war, a majestic monument by sculptor Nikolai Vatutin, depicting the military leader in full height on a granite pedestal. Thus tragically ended the life of one of the most talented Soviet military commanders. Nikolai Vatutin did not live to see victory, for which he had done so much. He did not see the liberation of Europe, the surrender of Germany, the triumphant parade on Red Square. But his contribution to the defeat of Nazism cannot be overestimated. The legacy of Nikolai Vatutin in the history of the Great Patriotic War is as significant as his fate is tragic. A commander who did not live to see victory by just 1 year, he left an indelible mark on military art and the memory of the people. His strategic genius was manifested in key battles that determined the course of the war: the Stalingrad and Kursk battles, the forcing of the Dnieper, and the liberation of Kyiv. Each of these operations became a model of military art and is still studied in military academies. Vatutin belonged to a new generation of Soviet military leaders who were able to overcome the dogmatism of the pre-war years and develop a flexible, maneuverable strategy that took into account the realities of modern warfare. His distinctive features as a commander were unconventional thinking, the ability to deeply analyze the situation and make bold decisions. He never acted according to a template, always sought new ways to victory, minimizing personnel losses. Vatutin's influence on the development of Soviet military strategy is hard to overestimate. He was one of the first to realize the importance of large tank formations for breaking through enemy defenses and developing success in operational depth. His methods of creating mobile groups operating independently of the main forces were innovative for their time. Vatutin skillfully used the terrain, weather conditions, the element of surprise. All that transforms warfare from a craft into an art. After the commander's death, his name was immortalized in a multitude of monuments, street and square names throughout the Soviet Union. In Kyiv, the city whose liberation became one of Vatutin's most brilliant operations, a magnificent monument by sculptor Nikolai Vatutin was erected in his honor. The commander's native village of Chepokino was renamed Vatutino. Military schools, ships, and enterprises bore his name. In the post-war years, books were written about Vatutin, films were made, and works of art were created. His biography became an example for several generations of Soviet people. A man from a peasant family who, thanks to talent and hard work, reached the heights of military art. His closeness to soldiers, his care for people, and the absence of the arrogance characteristic of some military leaders were particularly emphasized. However, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the re-evaluation of many historical events, the attitude towards Vatutin's figure, especially in Ukraine, became ambiguous. For some, he remained a hero liberator. For others, a symbol of Soviet power, which nationalist circles considered occupying. These contradictory views have become particularly acute in recent years. In 2014, after the events on the Maidan, the process of decommunization began in some Ukrainian cities, affecting the memory of Vatutin as well. Streets were renamed, monuments were dismantled. A particularly acute situation developed around the monument to the commander in Kyiv. Nationalist organizations repeatedly demanded its demolition, held protests, and desecrated the monument. Defenders of the monument pointed out the absurdity of the situation. The city rejects the memory of a man who liberated it from the Nazis at the cost of his own life. In Russia, Vatutin's figure is still revered. His name is included in the pantheon of great commanders of national history, alongside Suvorov, Kutuzov, and Zhukov. Military historians continue to study his legacy, analyze his operations, and draw lessons from modern military science. The dispute about Vatutin's personality and activities goes far beyond historical discussion. It touches upon fundamental questions of national identity, attitudes towards the Soviet past, and interpretations of events of World War II. In this dispute, the human dimension is often lost. The fate of a talented commander who gave his life for the liberation of his country from Nazism.